Was Grandpa, I was just wanting to have on video your experiences of a few experiences during World War II, your providential leading that God has brought you through World War II, about some of the accounts like um, conscientious objector status, Sabbath, etc. So,
Well, uh, I think probably be well to go back and set the mood for World War II. You see, we're living in a time of peace, several generations grown up. Uh, we need to get the mood of what was going on then, back in the 40s, 41, 42, and 43. Uh, and I want to begin with the point and the thought that I mentioned that the Lord has to get your attention. And like any young person that's entering their 20s, you are interested in seeing the world and seeing what it's like and all. And the Lord apparently wanted to get my attention that I was heading on a collision course. So one night, I was probably about 19, 20 years old, maybe a little older. I went to bed, and that night, after I went to bed, I dreamed I went out in the front yard. And as I was standing out in the front yard, I was talking to friends that I knew real well, and something caught my attention, and I looked up, and I remember making the statement, "Joe, it's too late. The Lord is kind." And I was petrified to think that I had fooled around and lost my chance. But I woke up, and I was in a sweat. I mean, a literal sweat. Found out that it wasn't too late. And that was the first time in years that I had gotten on my knees and prayed. And so I decided, Joe, it's about time you start straightening up and get in line. So I needed to look for a little church. I found one right around the corner. It was United Brethren. It didn't make any difference to me. It was a church. So I started going there. I went there for a few years. During this time, I was getting closer and closer to the war breaking out. In the meantime, after several years, Maria and I got married. And of course, she was Catholic and I was United Brethren. And we finally got married. And then I knew that the way things was going, that I would be drafted into the Army, which we realized was going to be a serious crisis in our lives because we had just gotten married. However, it was about a year or so. My first daughter was born, and when she was born, the very day she was born, Joanne, I received my notice. Hey, Arnie. So I went to the draft board. Well, I felt sort of uneasy after going to church and all. I felt like, why do we have to have war like this anyhow? There was so much politics and everything that I just didn't feel comfortable. I didn't mind serving our country. I didn't mind doing what I could do to save life, but I just didn't feel right in destroying life. Well, anyhow, I was made my desires known, and went down to the draft board, and they said they took care of it. I didn't realize what that meant. But anyhow, I found myself in the Army. After I had received my basic training, I was shipped to Windsor Locks, Connecticut, where I was attached to the Signal Air Warning Battalion and 1st Air Force, and I was put in a station hospital as a maintenance man. They told me I possibly would be there a while, and so I sent for Marie, my wife and daughter, and they came to Windsor Locks, Connecticut there, and we was there for about 16, 18 months. I don't know. But while I was at Windsor Locks, our workshop, the maintenance office, was in one side of the day room. And the day room is where all the soldiers go for recreation. Had a pool table in there and a few other things to play with and all. But I noticed that as time progressed on, I would hear different soldiers looking out over the scenery there and some of the buildings, and they'd say, "There goes that," they had some name for him. He was a Seventh-day Adventist is who he was, and they just tried to make life miserable for him. And they said, string him up, or, all kind of thing. Well, I thought, I don't understand why they want to treat anybody so inhumane. And so somehow I decided that I was going to make a friend out of him if I ever got a chance. Because I said, that fella needs a friend. Well, I didn't realize that I would be the one that would be benefiting by it. But the day finally came when he came over to the shop there one day. No one was there. Everybody was eating dinners. And I was still there. And so he came up and he asked me, he said, I just wonder, he said, if I could get a couple of sticks about this long. And I said, yeah. I said, what do you want to use them for? Well, he says, I want to make a little small tripod. He says, I've got a little small projector. And he says, I show Bible pictures. I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. And so I told him, come on in. And I was going to cut him a couple of sticks. And I cut him a couple of sticks. And I saw that he was pretty handy himself. So I thought, well, let's go ahead. So we built him a little stand. When he got all through, he told me how much he appreciated it. I told him, I said, well, some of these days, I said, I'd like to see one of those films you're talking about. And he was very tactful, and he said, well, one of these days I'll do it. I said, well, why not right now? Well, said if you want to. So he went and got it. We improvised a screen. And I'll never forget, he said, Joe, he says, before I show a study, he said, I always have prayer. I said, well, go ahead. And so he started praying, and he prayed out loud. He didn't pray to himself. And I thought, wow, boy, these soldiers hear that. Won't that be something? But anyhow, he went through, and I noticed as he talked and presented his study, it was on the state of the dead. I said, man, that really makes common sense. I said, I can understand that. Well, now, the interesting thing is, we'll have to refer back every once in a while. When I became a attendant and a member of the United Brethren Church, I remember that everybody seemed to understand the Bible so well, and I knew so little about it, that I asked the Lord, and it was my prayer for over a year or so, that the Lord would give me understanding and help me to understand. And he had that in mind too. And so after I met this Adventist and he gave his study, I went to a little Methodist church in town. That was the nearest church I could find. So one night I was going to prayer meeting there, and I told him about this fella soldier that had a little thing he liked. So they invited him to come up, and he gave a study, and I guess it was a little rich for their blood. They couldn't take it. So anyhow, I went with him on several more. But the strange things was that as Germany was pushing across Europe, and it just seemed like absolutely nothing would stop. I had a map, and that's something I wished I had your picture of. I got a picture of it. And I was coloring the map as Germany would make its advancement. Finally, they got to Dunkirk. You know what that was? They pushed them right out into the water and mowed them down. I thought, boy, something's got to stop him. They was asking for paratroopers, and so I volunteered to be a paratrooper. I wasn't concerned then about the conscientious objector. I was felt that this wasn't right. Well, the Lord took care of that too. He knew how to take care of it. And so after about 3 months of acquaintance with him, and he gave me a little leaflet there called the Home Study Bible Course. He gave me that after the lesson, and I'd take it home and put it away, or to my little apartment. And after about 3 months, the outfit was beginning to break up. And the company commander came to me one day and says, Joe, he said, I've kept you here as long as I can possibly keep you. He said, we're breaking out. They're breaking up the outfit, and they're shipping everybody here and there. They're putting them in the infantry. They're putting them here, putting them in engineers. He said, and I thought that you would like to stay in the Air Corps. And he said, I have one shipment, and so I'm going to send you out, which I appreciated. And so I got my orders. You're going to stop that. And so I shipped out, and Marie got on the train and went as far as New York. She went back to Ohio, and I went to Greensboro as an overseas replacement. There, we took a brush up, had an opportunity to take a I had 3 days furlough coming, and they asked me if I wanted it. I didn't think it'd do me any good. But little voice seemed to say, take it. I said, okay, I'll take it. So I went home to Ohio for the 3 days, and I thought, well, I'll do like all the other soldiers do. I'll just wire for an extension. So I wired for an extension. I got an answer, come back, said, return immediately. So I got on the train and went back. Well, when I got there, the entire barracks was empty. All the soldiers had shipped out the day before. Somebody had made a phone call, and they picked up the phone call, so they moved the shipment up to protect the soldiers. That left me out. Well, they headed to Japan. And so they said, well, you'll have to go up in this other section. You may be there 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 months. We don't know. So I sent for Maria, and she came back down. We were together for 3 months. But during that time is when I met a soldier walking through the barracks there, between the barracks. And that's the one that asked me, said, are you saved? I do. I don't know whether I'm saved or not. And so he gave me a little book called In His Steps. And Maria and I started reading that book, and it made a profound impression on both of us. I had sort of stopped doing anything with the studies. I had sent back to Irvin Sweet and asked him to send me the rest of the set, which he sent several of them. So Marie took one, and I took one, and on her birthday, I shipped out, went to Boston, and started to go to Iceland. I didn't know that's where we were going, but that's where we was going. Now, in the meantime, when I shipped out, I didn't have anything to do, so it was then time to start studying my lesson again. So I guess the Lord says, Joe, you're not doing anything, so he got me moving. Now, Marie took hers and went back home. And on the way overseas, we were on the USS Terra Z. There's the United Fruit Company had 5 ships that were for hauling fruit. They were loaned to the United States to ship troops on. And so we were on our way to Iceland. Oh, it was 2 days out, I guess. And we was getting up towards Torpedo Junction, they call it. That means the water was getting so cold that submarines couldn't operate. So what they did, they had to do before you got too far north. And I was sitting there on the ship thinking the situation over, and I was sort of a little nervous there. And being out in that much water, you realize that swimming is futile. So I asked a sailor, I said, sailor, how cold is that water? And I'll never forget his reply. He said, don't worry about it. He said, if you was to fall in that water, we wouldn't waste time throwing you a rope. You'd be froze to death. I thought, well, thanks. And then I got to thinking, boy, this is something. Well, when we got on the ship, I noticed that The officer says, stay off of the starboard side. You can go up the other side, but not the starboard side. And so naturally, we're trying to do what they told us. But suddenly, over the PA system came a command that is condition 4, condition 4, condition 4. That ship came alive. Those soldiers, everybody was running this way and that way. They stripped 3-inch guns and got in the seat there and was cranking that thing around. And I thought, wow. So I asked the sailor, I said, what's the problem? He said, well, we got engine trouble. I thought, well, I'm dumb, but I've never seen them strip a 3-inch gun for an engine. But I was sort of nervous, thinking we may be in trouble. And so I forgot, and I was walking up the starboard side. He told me not to go up there. I forgot about it. But then after I got up there a little ways, I heard voices talking. And I'll never forget, I heard one of the officers saying, well, they've got us and we've got them. He said, the first one makes a move gets it. Well, I noticed that the everything electrical on that ship was cut, and they was using flags to send a signal to another ship. I'd say maybe 300 yards or some out. An old escort. And I thought, well, we got problems. Well, I went over to the edge of the ship and looked down at that water that was so cold. And I realized that, this could be serious. And I was trying to get myself enough courage to face a possible reality. Now, we can talk and kid about dying and getting killed and all that and laugh about it. But brother, when you're looking down its throat, you don't quite take it that way. And so I was trying to make myself accept the fact and realize this is a common course of life. This happens every day. Little headline in the paper, USS Terra so many miles off of so-and-so, torpedoed and so on. 450 soldiers, and I said, so what? You're just one of them. And I talked to myself about 15 minutes, maybe more, trying to get my courage. It don't work. So finally, I thought, well, gotta happen, it's gotta happen. And I thought, well, that'll take care of that. And then the Lord brought, well, now it's my turn. Now, reverting back, I can see now why the Lord had to do this. Because 20 minutes earlier, I was on board that ship there, just within 30 feet of where I was standing, and I was looking around the deck, and I would see soldiers and sailors, and they'd be there. Some of them would be in a little huddle there gambling, and I looked at them and I thought, well, I'm sure glad I don't gamble. That's a bad habit. And then I looked around and I saw some others, and they were talking, and they were just using all kind of foul language, and I thought, yeah, I'm glad I don't use that kind of language, that swearing and all. And then I glanced around, there was another group, and they was drinking and carrying on. I thought, boy, I'm glad I don't drink. I had experimented with it for a few months earlier, but I had given that up. And so I thought, well, Joe, you've really come a long way. You're not such a bad fellow after all. And then condition 4. And for some reason or other, when I was there trying to get myself in condition and courage up, it just didn't seem to stick. But finally I thought, well, it's got to learn. Then the Lord taught, well, it's time for me to put my finger on it now. And so just softly he says, but Joe, what about the judgment? That buckled my knees. I just simply said, I'm not ready. I mean, I wasn't so good. It reminded me of the publican and the sinner. And I said, I'm just not ready. But the Lord is very patient and kind, and he'll just let you think. Finally, he said, well, what are you going to do, Vice? I thought, man, that's an idea. I'm going to get ready. And so that was the first that I can recall, a first prayer that was simple, earnest, and to the point. No flowery words. And the Lord took the weight of that ship right off of my shoulders. I was able then to go back, walk into the ship, go in and crawl into the hammock, and lay there. I mean, nothing bothered me. I wasn't nervous. I just never had an experience like that. Well, I laid there for about 20 minutes. And it seemed like the voice spoke to me and said, well, Joe, did it ever occur to you that the Lord may have something in store for you? I didn't know. I had never thought of that. And I thought about it, and I said, well, all right, Lord, I'll tell you what. If you get me out of this mess, I'll make you a promise that I'll follow you the rest of my life. Well, it wasn't 15 minutes, and that ship started full speed ahead, just zigzag, 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 taking a chance that they wouldn't get it. And the screw would come up out of the water. I mean, it'd just shake that whole ship, and then it'd sink down in the water because we had quite big swells. And they'd get in that water and churn. And then, anyhow, the next day we pulled into Iceland. We made it. And I thought, well, that's something, isn't it? Now, unless I would try to tell myself, oh, well, that was just, happenstance. As I was getting off of the ship, I passed some sailors. And one of them said, hey, did you hear what happened to the USS? I can't remember the name of those 5 ships. We didn't all go at one time. But I recognized the name at the time. And it was one of the sister ships. And the sailor said, yeah, they got the front end blowed off them. And I thought, wow. And the other sailor says, yeah, but what about the USS? And he mentioned another one. I thought, whoa. He said, that one got sunk. I thought, it wasn't chance. So I went on and I got to thinking about it. Well, I proceeded studying this little Bible lesson. And as I studied the lesson, I come convicted of the Sabbath. And I thought, well, yeah, I need to do something about that. And then the conviction of not bearing arms came back. And I thought, well, I got a problem. So I thought, well, what it looks like, I got to think this thing out. So Satan was suggesting, Joe, you've got to use good judgment in this thing. You know this is a time of war. What you need to do is wait till after the war, get this over with, and then you can start keeping the Sabbath. Well, might have a point there. And then I picked up my next lesson. And the next lesson was the sanctuary. And after reading and studying that lesson, I decided you may not come back from the war. You cannot put off a decision. You've got to make it. So, I thought, all right, I need to see a chaplain. And so I had 3 days. They put my name on the board there with the whole number of the others. And it says you have 3 days to draw your weapons, your ammunition, and be combat ready. I had trained as a combat soldier, thinking that it was just routine, that I was still non-combatant. Well, I wasn't. So in Iceland, you would have to understand the terrain there to get the picture. If you could see a large field that was level, that field would be miles and miles and miles long. But they would be rocks, 18 inches, 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, 6 feet, sticking above there. But the interesting thing was that rock that could be 3 feet sticking up could be 25 or 30 feet down. And the rest of it was fly ash. The volcano there, right just a short way from our camp, had erupted in the 18-something and spewed out 1 cubic mile of lava. And it just extended a peninsula out into the water. Well, they had Quonset huts, and they stacked those stones around the Quonset huts up about 4.5 feet, and put stuff in there to keep the wind from blowing the huts away. And then, of course, when you walked, you couldn't make a road because these rocks were in your way. You could see because the rocks would only be about so high. But you couldn't hardly put a road. They finally got roads in there, winding around. And so when I wanted to see the chaplain, I saw his driver. He drove a Jeep. I'd go up and talk with him and ask him where the chaplain was, and he said he's in that building. Well, the building would be about maybe 300 feet from where we were standing. That's the nearest you could get to the building. So I'd stand there looking at the building and looking at it. No trees, no grass, no nothing to hide behind. And I'd wait about 15 minutes, and I thought, well, I'm going to go to that building. So I started walking right straight to the building. By the time I got within about 50 feet of the building, I heard the Jeep. I turned around, and that chaplain was in that Jeep. I thought, how did he get out of that building into that Jeep without me seeing him? I mean, the buildings, there wasn't buildings everywhere where you could walk around behind things. It was wide open. That happened 3 times. Then I began to get the idea, well, maybe the Lord don't want me to see him. I don't know. Well, come to find out later that he was a Catholic chaplain, and the questions I wanted to ask him would not have helped me make a decision that I needed to make. So I had to finally faced the company commander. Now, I told the company commander 3 days when my name first appeared on the board that I needed to talk with him. He said, okay. I said, I'll have to do it within the next 3 days, though. Well, the next day, he flew home on a furlough. Very decent person, sounded very. But the fellow that took his position was a lieutenant. He loved his wine, women, and song, if you want to put it, because he'd go into Reykjavik, spend the night, come out, and he would use the foulest language you ever heard, cursing and swearing. I thought, well, I've got to go and stand in front of that fella and tell him I have been reading the Bible. I said, I can see him walking on the ceiling now. But I thought, well, I got to do it. So I thought, my time was up. I've got to go see him. So I thought the best thing for me to do is go down, be sure I'm shaved, cleaned up, and go at this thing right. And so I went down to the latrine and was washing up and getting ready. And as I was washing and shaving, I happened to glance down at the floor to my left. And on the floor was the Army Stars and Stripes. And I remember there were 2 pictures, about maybe 2.5 inches high, column width. 2 of them. I don't have any idea what this one was over here, but the one to the right was Slovak. And it said underneath it, in little headline about like that, I could read it standing up, to be shot for refusing to bear arms. I thought, wow. I knew I was in serious trouble because I had seen the persecution that Adventist went through in the States. This wasn't in the States. This was overseas combat. I thought, wow. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, I've already thought this over. I've have no choice. I'm going to go through it anyhow. I said, Satan, you know how to pick it, but I'm going to go through it anyhow. Well, Satan's very clever. Very clever. And he knows how to play the game, only he knows how to play a better hand than you do. So when I said, I'm going to go through it anyhow, I thought, that's that. He says, Jeff, says, you guys are all alike. You take the easy way out. Well, I looked back down at that picture, to be shot for refusing to bear arms. I said, what do you mean, easy way out? And I thought about it. And then pretty soon he repeated it. He said, yep, you're all alike. You take the easy way out. You see, Satan was building me to a pitch. He wasn't letting, he didn't just up and say it. He's building me to a point. Yeah, you guys are all alike. Very, I don't know. You didn't like the way it was said in the first place. And you take the easy way out. And I haven't seen anything easy about this. So he waited. And Satan was getting ready to play his trump card. Now, the interesting thing is now I can see what I couldn't see then. God was watching. Satan was watching. Here was a decision being made. And they were waiting to see how it would go. And Satan laid his trump card down then. He says, yep, you guys are all alike. You take the easy way out. He said, what about your wife? Good night, I hadn't even thought about her. Wow. Yeah, and he had some suggestions. You know, the family is Catholic. You know, they didn't want you marrying you, a Protestant. And, you know, for the last 2 weeks, you have not been able to correspond with her. You have had no way to tell her what's going on in your mind, what you are thinking about, or why you are coming to this conclusion. And I had received letters before. And when I received the letter, the army just cut out of the letter that come to you what they didn't want you to see and let you have the rest of the puzzle. And they did the same thing the other way. And so Satan was very handy. He says, well, you know, get a letter through, going to be censored and all that. And what they'll do, you know, you'll go ahead and get court-martialed and possibly you'd say shot or something. But you know what the telegram will say? Desertion. And your wife and your family will say, well, I told you you know, and boy, I mean, it was melting me down. Then he put the comment, he said, well, now you know she's expecting. And you know they're going to cut off all of her allowance. I hadn't planned on that. Then I understood what he meant. You take the easy way out. So I thought, ooh. I said, I got to think about this. So I went over and sat on a bench there and was thinking, and I thought, well, I'm in a bind. I can't do anything. I can't tell my wife anything. I can't say anything. She'll never know. I thought, ooh, this is hard. I said, to have her income cut off? Wow. And she's expecting? Man, she'd never understand that. So he really turned the heat up. I guess the Lord was watching too. I thank the Lord that the Lord just waited. And he was waiting to see how fixed my determination was. And so finally I was at my wit's end. I didn't know what to do. So I just said, well, Lord, I don't know what to do. I said, you know I love you. You know I want to obey you. You know I have made you a promise. I said, I'm going to have to trust Marie into your hands. Now, that was the second time in my life that the weight of the world came off of my shoulders. So I thought, well, I better go see the company commander. So I went up to the barracks, and I thought, well, I was nervous. I thought, man, what? I need some encouragement. So I looked on my bed, and there laid my Bible. I had a little Bible that I kept, and it was laying open upside down. And I thought, well, I'll just pick it up and read something. I don't know what to read in there that would give me any courage, but I'll read. And I turned it over, and my eyes fell on the text. You shall be delivered to councils. Take no thought what you will say in that hour, for the angels will give you words to speak. Wow. I read that again. Now, I didn't know that text was even in the Bible. The Lord knew it was there. He knew I needed it. So I folded it up, turned, and I said, well, Lord, very reverently, I said, you better be giving me something to say. I don't know. So I went over to the company commander, and of course I had to show the military courtesy. When you approach a company commander, you're supposed to stand 3 feet away from his desk and salute and stand until he says at ease. And I went in. I was so nervous and carried away, I just walked right up to him, grabbed the hold of the edge, and I think my fingerprints are still in it. But I told him, I said, sir, I have a problem I need to discuss with you. And so he said, well, all right. I said, I got to thinking, I thought, well, I might as well confront the bearing of arms first, because if I can't get past that, I won't need to worry about the Sabbath. So that was my reasoning. So I told him, I said, sir, I said, I've been reading the Bible, and I said, I've come to a conviction that I can't bear arms. And knowing him and his language and everything, I was braced for it. And he looked at, he said, Corporal, go get this man's record. So he went to get my record and came back out with my record, and he sat there looking through the record. And he looked, and he looked, and he looked, and he looked. And he saw that I had been trained for combat. Chemical warfare, camouflage, firing range, the machine gun, the whole ball of wax. And he looked at it, and he wiped his head, and he'd look back at it. Now, the interesting thing was, he, acting as company commanders, he thought, well, I better call the colonel of the island, the base. So he called the colonel. Said, sir, said, I've got a soldier here that doesn't want to bear arms. He said, oh, he doesn't, does he? Well, the colonel talked so loud on the phone that I didn't have to have the lieutenant tell me what he said. I could hear him. So he said, well, what church does he go to? And he put his hand out. What church you go to? United Brethren, that's the church I went to. I mean, I went to any church if it was a church. But I went to United Brethren. And I heard the colonel say, oh, he is he? He said, well, I am a United Brethren. Oh, wow. And I'll tell you, Lieutenant, in the United Brethren Church, it is optional. You can bear arms or not bear arms. However, and the phone shook, on this island, everybody carries a weapon. He said, yes, sir, thank you. And he held up. And the lieutenant looked up at me and he says, the colonel says everybody has to have a rifle on this island. Well, I said, sir, perhaps you didn't understand what I said. I said, I'll draw the weapon. I said, it'll be the cleanest weapon you ever saw. I said, I know how to take care of a firearm. Mm-hmm. What I'm telling you is I won't use it. he picks up my record, starts moving back to all that stuff. I thought, well, I've been trained with the Springfield, the carbine, and other semi-automatics, and he looked at all of that. But I had a good record. And he looked there and he said, oh, he said, I see that you've been in a station hospital. I said, yes, sir. He said, I tell you what. He said, when the shooting starts, why don't you make a beeline to the hospital? I said, well, I have no problem with that. He said, okay, will that take care of it? Well, I had to explain to him first. And I think this is the part the Lord put in my mind. I told him, look, after he said everybody had to have a weapon on this island, I said, what I'm trying to tell you is I can't use it. I said, my country has put me here, and my country is expecting me to do my duty. And if you put me on a post with a firearm, it's my responsibility to protect my fellow soldier and to carry out my duty. What I'm saying is I cannot do that, and I would rather face the problem now than to jeopardize one of my comrades. Well, apparently that made good reasoning to him, you know. So anyhow, he told me, just make a beeline to the hospital. Big smile. He says, okay, does that take care of it? I said, well, that's half of it. He blinked, looked at me, and he said, what do you mean? I said, well, while I've studied the Bible, I said, I found that I have to keep the Sabbath. That's from Friday sunset to Saturday sunset. I said, now, I'm not afraid of work. I said, you can work me night and day. You can give me the dirtiest, filthiest job there is here. I'll do it. I said, but when it comes Sabbath, no, can't do it. Yeah, he gets the book out, start fumbling through there, and he looks. He says, oh, I see you're an 050. So he gets on the phone, and he calls the maintenance. Said, hey, Mr. Tolman, said, Mr. is a warrant officer. He wasn't a lieutenant. He said, Mr. Tolman, I have a soldier here. He's an 050. Good record, but he won't work on Saturday. Can you use him? He said, yeah, send him down. Well, I went down. Now, he said, now, I tell you what. They have inspections on Saturday. He says, when Saturday comes, get lost. I thought, well, it won't be hard on this island. All these rocks around here. So I thought, oh, great. Well, now I'll tell you, Jimmy, the most glorious Sabbaths I have ever experienced in my life was sitting on those boulders with my little Bible. I never saw any, but I know there had to be angels there. There had to be. Happiest time I've ever had. Now, I got to working there, and the carpenter and cabinet maker was working on something. They had drug a piano around on those rocks and tore it all to pieces, and he was trying to rebuild it, and he told me what had to be done to finish it. And I finished it and painted it and fixed it up for him. But I worked. My philosophy was I was going to stay out of the Army as long as I could lawfully stay out. But when I got in, I was going to give them all I got. And I think it paid off because you take on your obstacle courses and all. If you don't put everything into it, when the time comes, it is not an obstacle course. You better know or hope you know how to do it. And so I really put my best in it. And I would work, and I'd get all my work done. He would give me jobs. I figured once I became an Adventist, and I could see this Adventist back in the States, how they persecuted and treated him. And I was braced for it, but it never happened. The people in my barracks respected me and treated me well. And the warrant officer gave me jobs to do. And when he gave me jobs to do, I did them, got them over with. And then I had time, I would make little toys for your mother.
Right.
And do that. But when I had a job, boy, I did it. And I remember one day the warrant officer came over there, and he was having problems with the electrician and with his plumber. And I mean, he chewed them out. Look at these jobs. I've asked you to do that. I asked you, talking. Then he turned and he says, and I was there just working on something for myself. I didn't have anything to do. The shop was cleaned up. Everything was in order. And he says, I tell Joe, I don't remember what he called me, Joe or what. He said, I tell Private Joe or whatever he is, Malmede. He says, I tell him to do something, he goes, takes care of it, just like that. He says, I'm trying to get, I thought, ooh. But anyhow, that went on for a little while. And I thought, well, this is great. Now, it was very hard and very difficult. After I had made my decision to keep the Sabbath and not to bear arms, then I sat down and wrote Maria and explained the whole thing to her so that she could understand where I was coming from, understand the importance of these things. And so I wrote those letters. Well, as I said before, mail couldn't get through for 2 weeks. The weather wouldn't permit it. Well, it wasn't more than a day after I'd made that decision that the weather broke and mail came through, and I got a stack of mail like that. And, of course, my letters to her got through. Now, the interesting thing was I took them apart and I put them in order according to the date. And I started reading her letters. And here, lo and behold, she had been studying these same lessons, and she come up with the idea that she needed to keep the Sabbath. And so she was running into flack from her Catholic family about the Sabbath. And she'd go out by herself, take Joanne with her. You go up, and she found a little church, Adventist church in Lima, Ohio. And she wrote in the letters, oh, you ought to hear the preacher here preaching. She said, oh, he preached something about the second coming. I've never heard anything like that. Well, Elder Schneider could preach a sermon, and he'd have you looking up at the ceiling. I mean, he was the second person that believed what he had lived, what he believed. And so she was writing, telling me all that. And of course, my letters was telling her what I had decided. So naturally, we were an exceptionally happy couple. And so I could face, if I could face the other, I could face the rest of it. So finally, we knew was financially hurting. I mean, they didn't pay much in World War II. Once a month, not very much. So we needed more money, but the only way to get more money was get a rating. With rating come responsibility. One day the warrant officer come up to me. I thought, well, now that I'm keeping the Sabbath, I'm washed up. Warrant officer came up to me and says, Sergeant Malmede, I want you to go up to hut number so-and-so up there and take an exam. I knew what that meant. I thought, ooh, I'll just decided not to bear arms or just decided to keep the Sabbath. I don't want an officer's responsibility, non-commissioned officer, responsibility to add burden and upset anything. And I told him, I said, sir, I appreciate that, but I don't believe I would really care to go. And the Lord knew we needed that money. And of course he thought, well, Joe, I can take care of that. So that warrant officer looked at me. He was about my same height. He looked at me, squared off, and said, soldier, I didn't ask you if you want to go up there. I'm telling you to go up there. And well, I had no choice. You didn't talk back to an officer. So I went up and I got a corporal rating. Well, that gave us an increase in pay, which helped. Now, the interesting thing was they then began to break up that outfit. And so what they were going to do, we had received a shipment from Europe, Germany, of soldiers that had been fighting for 2.5 years in combat. And they came to Iceland and they were going to be going back to America. I was there to go take their place. So what happened is somebody came to me and they posted in the dining room on the bulletin board, they posted the notice. List of names, you're transferred to this outfit, you're transferred to this outfit. So they told me, they said, Joe, you're being transferred into the infantry. I thought, oh boy, got to go through all this again. So I waited till supper, and when I went to eat supper there, I looked on the board, and sure enough, there was the list. I looked down, and there was my name. Only difference was, I had a red line drawn through it. And there was another fellow up above. He was in my same barracks, and the line was drawn through his name. His name was Pinkley. He lives right here in Tennessee. I've talked with him and met him. So I told him, I said, well, don't worry. Marie? So I told him, I said, don't worry. I said, we're going. And the next year or so.
Is that rain? Okay. Could you have him call back probably about a half an hour? Right. Because that'd be the completion of this. Okay.
So what happened was that he, I lost nothing.
You were talking about Pinky. His name also was.
Oh yeah. So the next day, there was another list up there, and somebody came to me and said, "Hey Joe," says, "you're going to be transferred into the military police." I thought, "Yike!" Of all things, I needed that, you know. Get out of that one. So I thought, well, the time I went there for supper, another red line drawn through it, and Pinkley's name. And a few days later, they come and said, "Hey Joe," he said, "you're being transferred into artillery." I said, "Yike." So that evening when I went to eat supper and looked on the bulletin board, there it was, artillery. And there was my name, but by that time there was a red line drawn through that and a red line through Pinkley. And I thought, wow. Then a few days later, hey Joe, you're going to be transferred into the engineers. Engineers. And I went there, and sure enough, the Engineer Corps, my name, a red line through it, and a red line through Pinkley. Well, the upshot of the thing was, several weeks later, those soldiers that was going back to the United States, we were with them, getting on the USS Duchess of Bedford, going to England. I thought, wow. All right, we got into Southampton, England, and they put us on the Queen Elizabeth. And the officer that was bringing us soldiers back wanted to stay over there because he would lose his rating when he got back in the American theater, but overseas he could have kept his rating, and he volunteered our outfit to go and do a police job. And I don't know why, but he got a telegram says, get those men back to the United States immediately. And we came back to the United States. Well, we landed at Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. And got there, and the first thing I did was get on a telephone, and I made a long-distance phone call. Say I'd been overseas 7 months. And I had been with Marie prior to that. But anyhow, I called home and found out that I had a little daughter named Marie.
Wow.
And so I was so excited I forgot to ask a lot of questions. But anyhow, they told me then that you're going home, you have a 45-day furlough, and then you are to report back to San Antonio, Texas, to go back overseas to Japan. Germany was surrendering while this was going on, and the fact that they surrendered made some changes. And so I thought, okay. So I went home and had a 45-day furlough. Well, we had bought some property. I told Marie to buy some. I saw some there, and I told her to go ahead and get it, and she bought it, 2 lots. And so during the 45 days, I thought, well, I can't do much on building, but I can put a water line in. So I dug a ditch, maybe 300 feet long or something, and drill a hole underneath the road and drove the water line underneath. Had everything all ready for me. My time was up. I told Marie goodbye because I knew I was going back overseas. So I got to the railroad depot there in town. I went in and told the ticket man, I said, I need a ticket to San Antonio just one way. He said, oh, why don't you buy a round trip? I said, I won't need a round trip. He said, well, maybe not, but you ought to buy a round trip. I thought, what in the world is he trying to sell me? I said, all I need is a one way. Well, if I was you, I'd buy a round trip. I thought, good night. Just give me my ticket, you know. And I said, where I'm going, I won't need a round trip. Man, I'd buy one and say it won't cost you anymore. I thought, well, give me a round trip. If not going to cost me anymore, anything, get this thing over with. I got to get on the trip. So he sold me a round trip ticket. I put it in my pocket. He said, you can sell the other half to somebody. And I said, okay, and I just strap it in my pocket. Well, we got to San Antone. It was 2:30 in the morning. The first sergeant that was receiving us had been out partying till about 12. And he come in and he wanted to go to bed. And he wasn't in a very good humor, but he had to go through a whole string of soldiers to get them situated. Well, I thought all they'd do is just march us in and put us in the barracks and that's it. But he had everybody line up. And after he got through with all this profanity, he said, now look, I'm tired. I want to get to bed. I don't want any sad stories. I want your name, rank, serial number, number of points. Number of points? Oh, they're on a point system. I remembered that. Well, he says, don't give me any stories. And so we started down, and every once in a while I'd hear him, I said I don't want any of these sad stories and all that stuff. Give me your name, rank, serial number, number point. I want to get to bed, boy. And he'd curse a blue streak and, and so finally he got down to me. Now, there was something behind me, but I looked at him. I gave him my name, rank, serial number, and stopped. He said, number point. I said, I don't know. I said, I may have 60 or I may have 48. I don't know. And he just looked at me. I'll never forget that look. He just looked at me like, you don't know. And then he come to his senses. Well, he said, I'll give you a break. Step over here. And boy, he cursed the next fella out. Poor guy. I couldn't. Poor fellow. He hadn't said anything. But anyhow, I was there. And what that meant was I stood a chance of getting a discharge instead of going overseas. I thought, you've got to be kidding. Well, for 2 weeks, I was extremely nervous.
Amazing.
So, I met different soldiers, and I was telling them about the Sabbath. I was really thrilled about finding the Sabbath and all. But finally the day came when we had to start processing to see whether we really got a discharge or went overseas. So, they had a table, one of those folding tables, and there was 3 sergeants on one side, 3 soldiers on this side, sitting somewhat sideways. And so they had my record, service record, and was asking me some questions, and I told him that I had a little girl. I said, it's possible I could have 12 more points. And I said, I could verify it with the Red Cross. He said, no. He said, when you get up out of that chair, you've had it, buddy. I said, yeah, I guess. So I was thinking, man, to come this close.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at the record. Well, the other sergeant finished the soldier he was with. And there wasn't anybody behind me. So he looked at the sergeant. I remember I was thinking, what could I do? And this sergeant says, let me see that fellow's record. I thought, he's going to try to trick me up, see if I'm lying. And so I was looking down at the floor with my back almost towards him. And he'd keep asking me questions, and what's the girl's name? And when did you say she was born? And what'd you say her name was? And all kind of questions. I thought, he's trying to trip me up, sure as shooting. So finally he got through, and he took the record and handed it back to the other sergeant. Says, oh, I think you'll find that information in there. And this fella had been writing everything I said down there. And the other sergeant opened it up. Well, I'll declare, yes it is. You got another. Let's see, that gives you 12 more points. That you just have 60 points.
Wow.
That meant a discharge.
Wow.
I was so weak I almost fell on the floor. I couldn't believe it. And he signed the thing and says, okay. I thought, oh, this is too good to be true. There's no way. Well, the day came, a couple of days later, that we was to meet over in a big auditorium, and they'd read off the names and give you your discharge, what they call the ruptured duct, to sew on your thing, showing that you were honorably discharged. So, you know, soldiers walking around, what are you doing walking around? Right. You need to be fighting somewhere. So they give you that and little pin and your ribbons and all. And they would go alphabetical. Well, they'd get through the M's and get on into, yeah, I thought something could go wrong. And then they'd start over again. I'd get my hopes up and then go down, and finally they kept going on about 6 or 8 times. They went through the alphabet. Finally, they called my name out. I couldn't believe it. I went up and got that discharge, and the other, and you handed that to me, and I walked away with that in my hand. I'll never forget. I thought, God, there's the discharge, there's the buttons and everything. I looked down, and there's my train ticket. And I thought, how about that? Now, and the interesting thing is that the Lord just had to show how he can handle a situation. And I've learned some important parts, as I mentioned earlier. I learned that one of the things that's been the greatest help to me is in life. You get into a situation, you may get your nose flat up against a brick wall and you can't move a peg. And when you tell the Lord, Lord, I can't move, he says, well, I didn't think I'd hear you say it, but now I'll show you how to do it. And so I learned that lesson, that the Lord has to wait for you. Man's extremity. What's an extremity? That's the end of the rope, isn't it? Yeah. It's God's opportunity. I've learned that lesson. And there's a number of lessons that I have learned. Now that's sort of brief and short. But that's a story, and sometime I think it's something that's important now.
Add to it.
Fill it in. Because there's a lot of things that I left out. About the Catholic chaplain, I found out he was a chaplain. He wanted me to make him a little box for last rites. If you understand the Catholics, they have a little crucifix and a little candle, and they light that and burn it, to give a last rites. And so I got a picture of that, by the way. But the chaplain was very friendly. We became very friendly. But I realized immediately what I wanted to talk to him about would never have worked. Never have worked. Because I was going to ask him regarding some of those statements of the Catholic Church. They're the ones that says, yes, we changed this habit. Whether he'd have said that or not, I don't know. If he'd have denied it, then what? So it was just providential that couldn't happen. But I had a real good experience. I really made friends instead of uh, I've got picture there of my bed in that hut. You can see my rifle hanging there where I had it, and this Pinkley, Jesse B. Pinkley, he slept catty-cornered across from me. He was a Church of Christ, and he came to me one day, and I'll never forget. He was a very friendly person, but he said, "Joe," he said, "I wished I had the courage you had." I'll never forget that. And he was the one that told me that there was a Seventh-day Adventist church in the city of Reykjavik. And I thought, well, instead of sitting out among the rocks, I'll go into the church. And I went into the church. But the pastor preached his sermon in Icelandic, but he taught the Sabbath school class 3 American soldiers in English. Now, he taught so well that I still remember the Sabbath school lesson. It was God's remnant church. He had me sitting on the edge of my seat. That one soldier that was there, he told me, he said, "Joe," he said, "I got a book you ought to read called A Great Controversy by E.G. White." I said, "I don't care about E.G. White. I want to hear what this guy going to say. He's talking." I never heard anything like it, you know. And I made the comment, I said, boy, back in the United States, if they could preach like this man preaches, that'd set the world on fire. Well, I didn't know the Lord had a whole bunch of them. Oh, wow. But you see how things have changed. Back then, Adventists were a cult in the full sense of the word, or sect. Yeah. In the full sense of the word, people look down on them. Now, people don't look at us that way. And so we have to take that into consideration back then. But well, I guess we may as well cut it unless you want to have.
Oh, no, I was just going to tell you thank you for sharing that with me. I guess, like I was telling you earlier, one of the verses that comes to mind is in Revelation chapter 12, and it's talking about, of course, the great controversy, which you alluded to, and when it gets down to the part where it talks about their overcoming, it mentions 2 basic elements by which God's people, the remnant, etc., overcome. And it says, by the blood of the Lamb, which is obvious. We can't do that without Christ. But the other thing is, it says, by the word of their testimony. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's been extremely encouraging, obviously, both because you are my granddad, to hear it personally from you, but also the fact that that testimony where you had been through a rather incredible experience during World War II, where conviction had to be lived out. And to me, that is going hand in glove exactly with what Revelation is saying. Is, to me, I mean, each generation has its own set of challenges, conflicts. And to hear, especially people who have walked that road before and shown their nervousness, their resolve challenged, and in the state of wavering, but finally having a resolute stance that by God's grace, this I'm going to do, and then God coming through. To me, that is powerfully encouraging.
Well, there was a good many experiences that you have. Military life isn't for a Christian, in my judgment. Because you're constantly thrown up against situations. For instance, in my basic training, Remember I told you that I thought that they recognized that I didn't want to carry a rifle. But I thought, well, they just going through a routine training, so I'll do that. Everything's taken care of. Well, we were out on a training field, and there were some Jehovah's Witnesses way on down the line there. Well, we didn't have enough rifles, so they give us some sticks to practice with. Well, they didn't even want to touch the sticks. They wouldn't take the stick. We heard a big rumpus down there going on, and the commanding officer and boy, they were just going around and around. And so we got back. It was cold. We got back to the barracks, and they all huddled around the stove. Well, these soldiers there were talking about what happened. And I'll never forget, I was standing there in the crowd, and one seemed like the leader of the group there was talking. Boy, he said, they ought to take guys like that out and just string them up. Not fit to live. And I thought, wow, you know. But I can understand Peter standing out to warm himself. But the fellow with the big mouth and doing everything turned around, and when he turned around, he looked right straight at me and says, "Isn't that right, Joe?" And I thought, good night. Am I going to be a coward, or am I going to be honest? I never forget that. Boy, you know, you get in a crowd of people and they start talking about stringing them up, and boy, then they turn to you.
Yep.
And I looked at him and I said, well, I don't know. I said, I'm a non-combatant. I didn't call myself a conscientious. I said non-combatant, because that was my contention. I wasn't conscientiously objecting to serving. I wanted to be non-combatant. And I just told him, I said, I'm non-combatant. And he looked at me and just looked at me, and everybody looked at me. And, well, you're different, he said, and went on. Well, you get tests like that all along the way, you see. And like you said, a testimony. When something came up, I could see this first Seventh-day Adventist stand like a prince, his head up, erect, and look him right in the eye. And boy, they'd just be chewing him out, and it just was like water on a duck. It just went over. He just looked at him. I remember this one sergeant was just chewing him out because he was a few minutes late getting back. Well, he had another 30 minutes, but he was just a couple of minutes late getting back. Well, I handled all I needed to. I was working with him, and it didn't bother me. And he was just chewing that soldier out. I was watching it, and I thought, wow. And so he said, where have you been? He just squared his shoulder and looked at me. He says, well, I just stepped out in the woods and I was praying. Oh. And Sergeant went into a rage. Didn't faze him a bit. I thought, that man's got something I want. I want that. There's only one way to get it. And that's to be completely committed. You have to trust. Like you say, you never know what the Lord's going to permit. But it takes that. And like I say, once you make the commitment, then the Lord will follow through.
And that reminds me of what you said just before we were taking it. You said that one point that came clear to you was that God honors those who honor Him.
Yeah. He said He will honor those that honor Him. Well, since then I have done a lot of reading. Naturally, I've been exposed to this Advent lifestyle and beliefs and have benefited by the gift of prophecy, spirit of prophecy, I better make it clear, spirit of prophecy. And I find that that is true also in a more extended sense, that those that were martyred had to make their decision that I'm going to do it regardless. And once they made that decision, then the Lord drew near. And that's why they could sing. If you'll notice, most of the people that were martyred, they'd throw them in the dungeon, this, that, and the other. But when they put them at the stake, they sang. They didn't sing when they were first thrown in the dungeon. But when they were burning, they sang. You read and take a look at that. So I'm under the conviction that God has promised, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. And He'll keep that promise. Now, we may not see it, we may not understand it, we may be going through severe trial, we may wonder, well, man, he's lost his life. But still, the Lord was there with him. And He'll take care of that part of it.
Well, I guess in closing, unless you had any other points that you wanted to communicate, I would like to have you pray about, whatever you might. I mean, in other words, I would like to hear you pray about those of us who have not yet faced those. Perhaps God will spare us. I don't know how soon Christ will come, but that we would have the same resolve that God helped you to experience.
Well, Jimmy, if we allow the Holy Spirit to do what it needs to do, it'll be there.
That's true.
It'll be there. During the prayer meeting session, I think I preached a message in June. And the title of that was God's Other Gift. Now, you remember, God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. All right. Jesus told Nicodemus that he had to be baptized or born from above.
Right.
All right, you go to John 14, we're told there that Jesus would give the gift of the Holy Spirit, to call it another comforter. All right, the idea of this gift is the Holy Spirit is a gift just like Christ was a gift. If we say, well, we have to let Jesus abide in our heart, it is through the medium of the Holy Spirit that He abides in our heart. Now, in that series of studies, I got my eyes open. The servant of the Lord tells us we are looking, and the ministry has failed to preach on the Holy Spirit and its work to the point that we are looking for it to happen in the future, and that is a gross mistake. So, I don't want to get started on that.
No, it's fine.
No. But that is something I wish you'd take some time and just
Say,
go look through. You take and look in the index under the Holy Spirit. You get your eye full. we talk about the early rain, the latter rain. Well, we need to understand what we're talking about. Servant Lord says one of the greatest gifts and privileges that we as a people have is one that we understand the least out experimentally. And so we need to realize that, sure, we think of the early rain as back in the days of the early church, and we refer to it, and that's true. And we think of the latter rain just before the Lord comes. But every human being goes through an early and latter rain experience of their own. Now, she says, many are making the mistake of feeling that, well, I'll have to absorb all I can of the latter rain because I didn't get much of the early rain, so I'll just have to get an extra quantity of latter rain. It'll never happen. She says, without the early rain, you will never get the latter rain. And the early rain, as you read her stuff and you read it for yourself, the early rain is really the process of growth in Christian grace or sanctification. And unless that growth has taken place, when the latter rain fall, there is no life there for the latter rain to bring. See, it's a completing work. This is the essential work. So I think it would be wise if we was to preach on the Holy Spirit more than we do, and help. It'd be an experiment just to find out what people really think about the Holy Spirit, the early rain, latter rain, that from that viewpoint.
Thank you for taking the time to share your experiences. It has meant a lot to me personally.
Yes. Well, we'll just bow. Heavenly Father, we realize that without you and without your Spirit abiding in our heart, without complete surrender to you, you will be hindered and unable to complete the work that you have started. Help us to learn how to surrender self and look to Thee, that you will be our life, our wisdom, our understanding, and our strength. And may we put our trust and confidence wholly in Thee, knowing that you are able to complete that which you have begun. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.